The lake had a name that nobody who wasn't from Chicago ever bothered to pronounce right, and Ethan Marsh had grown up close enough to it that the sound of waves against the break wall was as familiar to him as his own mother's voice calling him in for dinner. He was 31 years old, an architect at a mid-sized firm on Wacker Drive, and he had built his entire life around predictability, predictable coffee order, predictable route to work, predictable Saturday runs along the lakefront path. He liked things that stayed where he put them. That was until the 4th of July, when North Avenue Beach turned into an ocean of its own. Not water, but people, thousands of them, packed shoulder to shoulder on the sand, waiting for the fireworks that the city launched every year over the water. Ethan hadn't wanted to come. His sister Claire had dragged him out of his apartment with the promise of veggie burgers and cold beer, and he'd relented mostly because saying no to Claire took more energy than saying yes. The beach was chaos, blankets overlapping blankets, kids running through the gaps with sparklers, music thudding from 3 different speakers at once. Ethan stood near the volleyball nets with a paper plate balanced in one hand, scanning the crowd out of habit more than interest, and that was when he saw her. She wasn't doing anything remarkable. She was laughing at something a woman next to her had said, her head tipped back, dark hair loose and messy in the wind, wearing a faded green sundress that looked like it had survived 100 summers. But something about the way she laughed, full, unguarded, like she didn't care who saw her, caught in Ethan's chest and stayed there. He watched her for longer than was polite. Then the crowd shifted, someone's cooler got knocked over. A dog broke loose and went sprinting between legs, and by the time the commotion cleared, she was gone, swallowed whole by the thousands of strangers around him. He told himself it didn't matter. He didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her except the sound of her laugh, which he could still hear if he closed his eyes. He finished the night watching fireworks bloom over the water beside his sister, but his mind kept drifting back toward the space where the woman in green had been standing, like a phantom limb. He didn't expect to think about her again after that night, but he did, for weeks. He'd catch himself scanning crowds at the grocery store, at coffee shops, at the farmer's market on Wednesday afternoons, some small stupid hope flickering every time he saw dark hair and a flash of green fabric. Claire told him he was being ridiculous, that he'd built an entire fantasy out of 4 seconds of eye contact that hadn't even technically happened, since the woman had never once looked his way. She wasn't wrong. But Ethan had spent his whole adult life doing the sensible thing, and something about a stranger's laugh on a crowded beach had cracked a door, open in him that he didn't know how to shut again. 3 months passed. Autumn came to Chicago the way it always did, fast and merciless, stripping the trees along the lakefront in what felt like a single windy week. Ethan buried himself in a downtown renovation project, 12-hour days. Blueprints spread across his desk like a battlefield map. He stopped thinking about the woman in green, or told himself he had, until the Saturday in late September, when his firm was contracted to consult on the redesign of a public library branch in Lincoln Park, and he walked into the reading room to find her sitting at one of the long tables, glasses pushed up into her hair, surrounded by a fortress of books. Ethan stopped in the doorway like he'd walked into a wall. It was her. He was sure of it. The same dark hair, though pinned back now. The same wide, expressive mouth. She was wearing a gray sweater instead of a sundress, and there was a coffee cup by her elbow that had gone cold. Forgotten. He must have stood there too long, because she looked up, caught him staring, and raised an eyebrow with the kind of unbothered confidence that told him she was used to people staring and mildly amused by it. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was low, a little rough, like she hadn't spoken out loud in hours. "Sorry," Ethan said, feeling his face go warm. I think I saw you. On the 4th of July, North Avenue Beach." She studied him for a moment, unreadable. "That's a lot of people to remember one person out of." "I know, it's weird." "I'm weird. I'm going to go now." He turned to leave, mortified, and heard her laugh behind him. That same laugh, unmistakable, the one that had lodged itself in his chest 3 months ago and never left. "Wait," she said. "I was there. Green dress. My friend Priya spilled an entire bag of chips down my back right before the fireworks started." Ethan turned back around, something loosening in him. That tracks. There was a whole commotion. A dog got loose. That was my fault too. Not the dog. But I laughed so hard I dropped my drink, which is probably what set the dog off. He laughed, and something about the sound of it in that quiet library felt enormous, like it belonged to a bigger room than the one they were standing in. Her name was Maya Whitfield. She was a graduate student, finishing a thesis on urban planning and public space design, which was, she told him with a wry twist of her mouth, the reason she was drowning in library books on a Saturday instead of doing literally anything else. Ethan told her he was there for the renovation consult, and for a moment neither of them moved to actually do the things they'd come there to do. They ended up getting coffee 2 days later, at a shop near her apartment in Wicker Park, and then again the following week, and by October they were spending most weekends together, walking the lakefront in coats that weren't quite warm enough yet, arguing lightly about whether Chicago-style pizza counted as pizza or as a casserole with delusions of grandeur. Maya was sharp in a way that kept Ethan on his toes. She noticed things, the way a good urban planner notices the bones of a city, the invisible logic behind why people moved the way they did through public space. She noticed things about him too. She was the first person in years to ask him why he'd chosen architecture, and to actually wait for an answer instead of a summary. He told her about his father, a general contractor who died when Ethan was 19, and how Ethan had spent his 20s trying to build things solid enough that nothing could ever knock them down, not even time. Maya listened to that the way she listened to everything, fully, without rushing to fill the silence after. She told him in turn about growing up the daughter of a single mother in Detroit, about watching entire blocks of her childhood, neighborhood get abandoned and then slowly, painfully gentrified, about wanting to understand cities so she could help build ones that didn't leave people behind. By December, Ethan understood that what had started as a single moment of noticing a stranger's laugh on a crowded beach had become something with weight and shape, something he thought about with the same steady, load-bearing seriousness he brought to a blueprint. He told her he loved her on New Year's Eve, standing on the frozen lakefront with fireworks going off downtown in the distance, an echo of the 4th of July fireworks that had started all of it. Maya didn't say it back right away. She looked at him for a long moment, her breath fogging in the cold, and said, "I need you to know something first." She told him she'd been offered a position with an urban design firm in Portland, Oregon, a real position, the kind she'd spent years working toward, the kind that didn't come around twice. She hadn't told him because she hadn't known how, because she'd been happy in a way she hadn't let herself be happy in years, and she was terrified that saying it out loud would make the decision more real. Ethan felt something in his chest go cold and heavy, the particular grief of watching something good start to become something finite. He didn't ask her to stay. He wanted to. Every instinct in him wanted to build an argument the way he built everything else. Careful and airtight, a case for why she should choose Chicago, choose him. But he thought of what she'd told him about her mother's neighborhood, about people who got left behind by other people's plans, and he understood that asking her to give up the things she'd worked for in order to fit into his life would make him exactly the kind of thing she'd spent her whole career trying to build cities against. So instead he asked her what she wanted. Maya cried, which she told him later she almost never did, and said she didn't know, that she'd never had to choose between the work she'd wanted her whole life and a person before, and she didn't know how to hold both at once. They spent that January in a strange, tender kind of limbo, still together but circling the edges of an ending neither of them wanted to name. Ethan started researching Portland's architecture firms without telling her, quietly, the way he double-checked load calculations before he trusted them. In February, he brought it up over dinner, holding it out to her like something fragile. He'd found 3 firms in Portland, doing the kind of adaptive reuse work he cared about, sustainable renovation of old industrial buildings into livable, human-centered spaces. He told her he'd already sent 2 portfolios. Maya stared at him across the table like he'd said something in a language she was only just learning to understand. "You'd leave Chicago," she said. Not quite a question. "I built things because I wanted them to last," Ethan said. "I don't want to build a life that only lasts if you stay in the same zip code as me. I want to build one that comes with me, or goes with you. I don't actually care which direction it points. Maya, I just don't want it to stop." She didn't answer with words. She came around the table and put her arms around his neck and held on the way a person holds on to, something they'd quietly, secretly been afraid of losing. And Ethan understood finally that this was what all his blueprints had actually been for. Not permanence in a place, but permanence in a person, in the promise of showing up again and again, no matter what city held them. They moved to Portland in June, almost exactly a year after that first 4th of July on North Avenue. Beach, Ethan got an offer from the second firm he'd applied to, one that specialized in transforming old warehouses along the Willamette River into community housing, work that turned out to suit him even better than he'd expected. Maya started her new position the same week, and some nights she came home talking with her hands, sketching invisible city blocks in the air between them, and Ethan watched her the way he'd once watched a stranger, laughing on a crowded beach, except now there was nothing between them. No wall of bodies, no accident of distance, just her, entirely visible, entirely his to see. On the 4th of July, 1 year to the day since he'd first lost her in that Chicago crowd, Ethan took Maya down to the waterfront in Portland to watch the fireworks over the river. The crowd here was smaller, gentler, nothing like the wall-to-wall chaos of North Avenue Beach, but he wanted the day to matter anyway, wanted to mark the strange arithmetic of loss and finding that had built their whole relationship. He didn't tell her what the date meant to him. He didn't need to. When the first firework cracked open over the water, painting her face gold and violet, she turned to him unprompted and said, "You know what today is, right?" "Tell me," he said, though he already knew. "A year since the beach, since Priya spilled chips down my back and some strange man stared at me across a crowd of 10,000 people." She smiled. The fireworks reflected small and bright in her eyes. "I used to think that was the day nothing happened. Two strangers who never actually met. Something happened," Ethan said, and got down on one knee in the sand, the ring box steady in his hand, though nothing else in him felt steady at all. "I just had to find you again to prove it." Maya said yes with the same laugh he'd fallen for from 40 feet away in a crowd of strangers. Except now it wasn't lost in noise or distance. Now it was close enough to feel against his skin, entirely finally his to keep. They married the following spring on the same Portland waterfront, under trees just beginning to bud, and every 4th of July after that, whichever city they happened to be standing in, they'd find the busiest, most crowded stretch of shoreline they could and stand in the middle of it on purpose, hand in hand, just to prove to themselves that out of every possible stranger in every possible crowd, they had somehow, impossibly, found each other twice.